Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 121 today. And I'm here with my guest, Donna. How are you doing today, Donna?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I'm not too bad. I mean, the weather's been okay here in New Zealand. It's actually been very cold for some reason. In wintertime, you wouldn't expect that. How's the weather where you're at?
Terrible, swampy, hot.
Oh, God, that must be bad. Well, it is summertime in the United States. What have you been up to today? Anything much?
I did a episode about Jolly West and the Korean repatriated prisoners of war. So that took up most of my day.
Oh, fair enough. Would you like to explain what that is about and the dodgy history behind that? A lot of people don't know about it.
Sure. I won't go too deep that way. I'm not rambling, but there's some misconception.
Say how you feel, Donna. It's all good. You can say how you feel. It's all good. Go for it.
There's some I would say falsehoods being spread within certain communities on YouTube about the late Dr. Jolly West, that he was a whistleblower about communist mind control and brainwashing. And this was done by him just observing the repatriated prisoners of war from Korea. So I went through his resume, as well as the KUBARC Counterintelligence Interrogation Manual, which is the CIA's torture manual. And then I read through the recently, within the past, I think, 3 years, declassified documents about the lies of the Korean War, that we were, in fact, waging bacteriological warfare on those people, and our prisoners of war were not lying. And they were being tortured on military vessels coming back to the United States.
Wow, that is absolutely insane. I do know that the North Korean War and especially the Vietnam War has a lot of lies to it. What would you say out of the experiments that they were doing to the North Koreans in the war and at that time, what would you say was the worst incident that the United States Army did to the Koreans that you don't hear about from Western media and Western journalists?
So, an example that I pointed out today, because it's not so the bacteriological warfare, that's, anthrax. They were infecting lice and mouses and rats with just all kinds of things. And so it's what's worse, horrific medical experiment where maybe you die faster, or something that could take years down the road to impact you or your family. But something that I kind of drew into comparison, simply because of the time frame, is what was going on in Japan at the time with Unit 731, because it has also been declassified that we did pardon Ishii and the wicked, wicked individuals who were performing those medical crimes in Unit 731 in Japan at the time, from 1931 to 1945, so that we could get their medical experiments. So I would say Unit 731 primarily, because who knows if that was only going on there? No one really knows, and I don't trust the establishment to be transparent about anything at this point.
There's been a lot of, history going on. A lot of people have been coming out about the North Korean War and saying, it was a fight against communism. Oh, it was, when in fact that war was just another war that was done by the bankers and the elitists to just get control of the area and to fill their role. And the crimes they committed against a lot of the Koreans was just terrible, especially Vietnam. A lot of it was an inside job. And it's just crazy, and especially, going back to that, Donna, is there's been a lot of scandals going on, like that operation, that I've been reading a lot of alternative history, that, you get a lot of, people saying Operation Manhattan with, the United States dropping the bomb, with the film Oppenheimer that has come out. There's been a lot of people saying, that when the United States had dropped the bomb on Japan, it was to save lives, it was to do this, it was to do that. No, look, don't get me wrong. The Japanese army committed a lot of atrocities against people. It was horrible. It was terrible. It was bad. But the United States Army, for them to drop the nuclear bomb on Japan, and also at the same time, though, when the emperor was going to surrender, and then also, there was the Operation Unthinkable, which you probably heard of, or Operation Unthinkable, where they were going to originally drop the bomb on the Soviet Union. And, and even though, Winston Churchill, actually lost the election, which was a good thing, because if he didn't, Operation Unthinkable would have happened, and then the Soviet Union would have got bombed. When you look at that, and then, going to, seeing, how the nuclear bomb on Japan, killed a lot of people, it poisoned a lot of people, and people are still feeling effects to the day. When, if you watch a speech by Nelson Mandela, it's a very good speech by him on it. And,
I've seen it.
Yeah. And then also, you also got that video. I watched a good video by Truth Stream Media. Fantastic, Donna. Absolutely brilliant YouTube people. You should definitely look into them if you've not had. And they went on a video, where, Trinity Site. You've heard of Trinity Site, haven't you? Where they tested the first nuclear bomb in the United States.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So Trinity Bomb, and they did a video, explaining, how so many people there go there, they cheer, the fact the United States dropped a lot of bomb, on people and stuff, and they think it's a good thing to save lives when in fact it wasn't. And they also talk about how, how there were victims who were poisoned by the radiation of them, doing the testing. But you don't hear about that from the media. You don't hear about the testing, and how there are people who lived in Trinity Site, and how they protest, the testing site in the United States government at the time. And what's so sad is you have people who are on the buses, who are like tourists, who are leaving the, the tourist site at the same time. And when they're doing that, they end up flipping, the victims who are protesting outside, Trinity Site. And it's insane. It's absolutely insane, Donna.
It is. I completely agree. And I think that is an excellent example of the power of propaganda. The media says that this is good. This is what we need to do for national security and, for America. And people don't think about the real consequences. And, it's not that I'm not grateful to, be alive and, live where I live. However, I completely sympathize and empathize with the fact that most of the world hates us, and I don't blame them. But that's because I feel like I have a relatively good understanding of how the empire came to be, and it is not what they teach us in school.
How do you? So a lot of people say the empire, for instance, a lot of people said the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was when the empire came to be, because the United States went from a constitutional republic to an empire. A lot of people say that the Act of District of Columbia, the Act of 1871, was the beginning of the fall. What day do you think was the end of the United States as a constitutional republic and a democracy, and when it got taken over by the bankers and the elitists?
Well, a lot of people would probably disagree with me, mainly because I'm not, super well versed in the history of the reserve as far as dates and specifics. But I think, even though we don't know what they were doing at the time, between the time of the OSS and the CIA, because that was when, the mafia, essentially the government mafia, was completely given a pass to do whatever they wanted. And they have truly shaped not only our history, but the history of many nations around the world. And I think that, regardless of money, those nefarious minds coming together, that's what kind of the money and then these people that made everything happen. So I think it could be a two date, or a by date sort of thing, with the reserve and then the establishment of the security state.
Mm-hmm. When you look at what was the thing you were studying about with North Korea earlier, and that, what was the file's name again?
So this was in regards to the bacteriological warfare that we engaged in the war in North Korea.
What other things in that war, when you were researching that paper, what other things do you think people should know about that research that you were doing, that the media, that is very important for a history lesson? And what other things really disturbed you about that?
I think something that I won't say that it surprised me because I know that the United Nations has a incredibly poor track record as far as wartime and quote unquote helping people. But right before the armistice was signed, it was noted that the UN and the US were kind of dragging their feet when they could have ended the war 18 months earlier than that, and they didn't. So there's a very strong argument that the United Nations and the United States continued that war because North Korea was not a sovereign nation. They were not recognized as a sovereign nation.
Mhm.
So this was essentially us just going in and doing what we wanted, like we always do, quite frankly. And it was, in collaboration with the United Nations. This is something that, if you look at the history of Africa specifically, dating back to even Patrice Lumumba, the UN is very pivotal in accomplishing these goals.
With all the funding, the illegal coups, it's absolutely insane, especially what the British did, to a lot of these African countries. What other things do you think people should know about, the files you were studying about North Korea?
As far as North Korea, it's 764 pages long, but that is the full report and it tells you everything. So I would say anyone who has had any questions about the North Korean War should look at this because everything that they have taught us is a lie. It is a complete lie. What happened to those prisoners of war, our men, was a lie. And this is, I think, probably the first really strong historical example of. I would say the psychological arms race, where it's who can propagandize the general public first, because they were, trying to see if the people would be willing to go to war. And it worked. And those POWs, uh, they were haunted with that status for the remainder of their life. And a lot of them ended up taking their lives. And it's very, very sad.
That's not very good. It sounds to me, like it's the same thing, what they did with Pearl Harbor, because a lot of the United States government knew that Pearl Harbor was going to happen a few days before. And I think it was maybe 2 weeks before. And a lot of the United States, didn't want to go to war, with Germany and stuff like that. But Pearl Harbor was just another inside job to just get the United States into the war because it was the bankers who pretty much do that. It's just like 9/11. It's just like, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria. It's all the lies that they've done. So, talking about that, Donna, tell me about yourself. What got you into the conspiracy, or what got you into conspiracies, politics? What book what was the moment in your life that really, made you wake up? And how long have you been streaming, and what got you into this industry?
So I am, but I traveled as an ICU nurse during COVID when it was really bad. So seeing a lot of really horrible things in different places while I was on the road and seeing what was being touted on TV and what the WHO and CDC were telling everybody, um, I realized that something was very, very wrong very early on. And so I decided to just start reading a bit more, and I read this really fantastic book by Stephen Kinzer called The Brothers, and it is a biography about John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. And Allen was the first director of the CIA, and John Foster Dulles was the Secretary of State under Eisenhower. And it's a biography about both of their lives, and it shows how them being in those roles and having both of Eisenhower's ears, um, all the coups, all of them, Guatemala, Africa, Iran, Vietnam. I mean, just so many things that changed the course of world history forever. And I thought that I had a relatively good grasp on history because my dad was born in Germany. And so, real German history has kind of been beat into my head my entire life. But when I read that book, I was like, oh, I don't know anything. So, when I was done with it, I decided to start my videos. And then the UN came out in March for the advocation of pedophilia, and so I decided to cover the Franklin scandal. And then that's when, people started
What
asking
what
me
what
to
is
come on their
the
shows.
what is the Franklin scandal about? Because I've never really heard of that before.
Oh my. So the Franklin scandal, the best way I can explain it, it is the predecessor to Epstein, but this was within the Republican Party primarily. There were Democrats involved, but this was primarily Republican. It involved Mr. Lawrence King. He was a rising star within the GOP out of Omaha, Nebraska, and a gentleman named Craig Spence. He worked for the CIA, and he was also a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. So Craig Spence had his house set up sort of like Epstein, as far as very high tech for blackmail, with audio and visual recordings. Lawrence King ran a credit union in Omaha, and these two gentlemen trafficked kids coast to coast for very wealthy and powerful people, including themselves. Everything that happened within that case was very tragic. The children, which by the time these things got to court, two of the victims were thrown in prison. One was thrown in isolation for 2 years because she would not recant her statement. There were 16 unusual deaths throughout the investigation. And Mr. Lawrence King himself is free to this day, and he is working in a gifted kids opera program in Washington, D.C.
Wow, that is absolutely screwed up. I don't understand, how these people are allowed to do. What a messed up world we're living in, Donna. So, Donna, talking about that, like you were saying, your political background, like when you were in as a nurse, how long were you a nurse for? And like, what did you see in the hospitals at the time that like the media were lying about?
So I was a nurse for, I think, maybe 3 years before COVID came. And initially, because I remember I had like patient zero. So everybody was freaking out, like, oh, we got to make sure that all your PPE is on correctly. And I'm like, why are you guys, because we didn't know what it was. Nobody knew. And in hindsight, my patient was fine. It really wasn't a big deal. They didn't feel well, but they were okay. Um, so in the beginning, we would use what's called convalescent plasma. And this was plasma that was donated by someone who had it and who had recovered. And so they had the antibodies. And our patients were doing pretty well. I worked night shift at the time, and, we were posting on Facebook. If you guys would come donate, we've got the truck in the parking lot. We need the plasma, please. Um, and then it was when Fauci came out with the remdesivir. That was, I feel like that was really when everything changed. They were doing weird stuff with the ventilator protocols as far as the recommendations, but I personally think that the remdesivir was kind of the axe that really swung it in a direction that was so hard to turn around from. And just, I don't know, to me, it was, people aren't supposed to die alone. And I do believe this, because I had some patients who would just look at me and they would say, I give up. And when you give up emotionally and psychologically, your body's eventually going to follow suit. Um, and I can only do so much, right? But I knew the jig was up pretty early on because I would take off my PPE, especially if I thought that, my patient was going to crash. Because I don't care if you were my family member, I would want you to hold my, if that was my family member, I would want someone to hold their hand and treat them like a human being, not like they have the plague. And so I would take off my PPE and I would, hug them or hold their hand or pray with them, whatever they wanted. And I never got sick. So I knew that something was wrong. I just didn't really know what. Um, but it was, I feel like it was the remdesivir. And then people being alone and not being allowed to see their families. People gave up. That was part of the deaths, was people gave up. I watched it with my own
especially
2 eyes.
especially with the New York, housing, where elderly people were dying when Andrew Cuomo was, the mayor of New York City at the time. And there was a lot of, and especially in England too, a lot of that was happening in England. Elderly people were dying because they weren't allowed to see their cousin. And there was rumors going on that a lot of these nurses and doctors, not saying you, but a lot of these nurses were killing a lot of their patients. Like there's a lot of conspiracy theories about them. Anyways, like you were saying, keep going.
No, I mean, I've heard some crazy stuff too. And, when I was on the road, because there was one job and it was my longest job, and all of my patients died, and I'll never forget it. I almost gave up my nursing license after that because it was just so traumatic. But I got a doctor fired because I was able to prove. I mean, I couldn't prove intent, but I was able to prove that maybe just complete incompetence as far as patient care. But I don't know. I don't know what happened. I feel like it was the remdesivir. I feel like some people, whether nurses or doctors, and maybe I'm too sensitive. I don't know. Like I'm aware that I wear my heart on my sleeve, but I really do try to treat my patients like they're my family because my patients are scared. It's another day at work for me, but people are sick and they're scared. And I try to always put that at the front of my mind. And I feel like maybe some people got hardened by, just watching that sort of trauma over and over again. I don't know. Um, and some people, there's always going to be like the nurse ratchet and, the doctors who are jerks. And it's not all of healthcare. I'm not saying that, I'm still an ICU nurse, but uh, I am very disillusioned because I think it's completely unacceptable that there has not been some sort of massive, at least recognition that something was wrong and that we need to talk about it and we need to figure out what happened. It's people died alone. They didn't have to. I want to know why. I refuse to forget. I refuse to act like nothing happened, especially when I'm at work, because for all of my patients that died with me, a stranger, that's so cruel and it's so unfair. And especially for the geriatric population and those who, have the tendency to get confused or have dementia. They don't understand that they were not abandoned. And it's just, there was just so many inhumane things. So I'm not ready to forgive, but I think that the medical community as a whole has some very serious atoning to do to the general public. But I know that a lot of people don't feel that way within my industry, whatever.
Mm-hmm. It is absolutely disgusting, what the medical industry did during COVID. When you were like, as a nurse at that time, seeing like people in the hospital bed and all the lies, what would you say was the saddest story that you had of like someone? Is it okay if you can tell me, or you're not allowed to tell that information?
I can keep it, vague enough.
Yeah,
Sure.
could you like what would you say, for instance, was the saddest case that you had during the time when like COVID was beginning, and one thing that just really frustrated you that was just of a patient
Oh,
that
in
was
the
just
beginning,
yeah.
I've got one very specifically from the beginning. So if I get emotional, forgive me, but
It's
this will
okay, no
always
worries, don't worry about it. It's all good.
this will always stick with me. So I remember in the
Actually,
beginning.
do you want to talk about it, or if it's going to make
Oh,
you
it's
emotional?
fine. No, 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 it's
First,
fine.
yes,
It's fine. So I had this patient, and they were younger than me. They were pretty young, and they were kind of rough shape, but they were going to be fine. And I had worked overtime that week, so I had them, multiple nights in a row. And their hair was just such a mess. And so I decided to go to the Dollar Tree and get a whole bunch of stuff. And I said, we're going to put all this in your hair. We're going to let it stay overnight. And then I'm going to wash your hair in the morning because your hair is beautiful. And we're not cutting it off. And so I could tell that there was something wrong. And earlier that day, the last day that I was there, their parent passed away from COVID on another floor in our hospital, and they did not get to say goodbye. So they were in the exact same hospital, one floor away, and the hospital would not let them go say goodbye to their parent. And so when it came time in the morning for me to wash their hair out, they started crying, and they said, my mom this reminds me of my mom washing my hair in the sink when I was a baby. Thank you for doing this for me. It was just very sad, and that was in the beginning, and that person was really young, and that was so cruel because they were literally like 5 minutes away, like a 5-minute walk. But got to follow the rules, right?
Walk? Wow, that's unbelievable, man. I can't believe that.
Yeah.
They should have every right to see that victim, that's wrong. It's just, what other stories did you hear that was very emotional too?
Oh, I mean, it never ended, it was, I got knocked unconscious and had to go to, they had to rush me down because I was out on the floor because one of the jobs that I was traveling at, one of the spouses broke into the hospital and the patient knocked me out because the patient was trying to leave and the spouse was trying to break into the room. But in hindsight, I really don't blame them. I really don't. And I don't get upset with my patients because, they're sick. And I mean, to an extent, it's like, obviously, I've been assaulted, in various ways, countless times at work. But, this was obviously a little bit different. But there were just so many people that didn't get to say goodbye. I think probably the one that I completely lost it, like in the room with the patient. Well, there were two, but it was a couple that had been married for 65 years. And he gave up. And he had me FaceTime her for him. And I held the phone while they said their goodbyes. And just them telling each other that they love each other so much and that they miss each other. And they are certain that they will be reunited soon. It was truly heartbreaking.
Wow, this just makes me so angry. I really feel with the crimes that we've seen with COVID and the stuff we've seen coming out, whether it's been the Twitter files, whether it's been the vaccine, the sticky thing damage that's been damaging a lot of people. I'm just doing that as a code name because of YouTube community guidelines.
Sure.
Sorry about that. But
okay.
The amount of damages we're seeing, and especially right now, recently when the Football Women's World Cup is in New Zealand, and recently there was just a girl who actually had a heart problem. It's just the stick was not tested properly. Look, by the way, Diane, Donna, I was on a show with this girl called Christina Cotton. And when I interviewed her, just to find information, she's a girl who exposes. She was the girl who worked on one of the Pfizer vaccine leaks. Hang on, and I got the post here, and it says, here it is, and she's a girl who does a lot of work. You should check her out. And it's a tweet that I did on Twitter, and it's got a lot of views. Hang on, so it says this. It sounds major findings into the Pfizer clinical Pretro, whatever its name is. You have two processes to manufacture the little magic stick, which is code name for the community guidelines. Yeah, the results provided 95% of the accuracy of Progress 1. Billions of people have received the jabs. Manufactured within 2 weeks tested. Over 250 participates on which were not provided. They were not provided the results from the first, from 2 proshes of the Pfizer and the testing. And it's the hugest propaganda and scandal in history. That's what, I discussed with her and she proved to me. And she also proved it's crazy, isn't it, eh?
Yeah, it's disgusting, quite frankly. Like I said, it's, I fortunately was able to maneuver out of having to follow that requirement, but I did almost get fired twice because I was refusing. But the back to back psychological warfare, because truly it was being with my patients and them having the TV on and just watching every channel, the fear porn non-stop. And I'm just like, this is literally a massive propaganda campaign. Now, don't get me wrong. My patients were sick, but I don't know exactly why. I don't. I do not know. Those are answers that I do not have. For some of them, I have suspicions, I have my assessments, things that I remember. And, because I felt like something was wrong, and especially with the remdesivir, my patients' families had my personal cell phone number because some of my patients were so sick that I wouldn't be able to leave the room. I would be in the room for 10 and a half hours. I would be bringing extra scrubs because I would be soaking through mine. And I would say, you're just going to have to call me or call me when you know that I'm off in case I forget to call you. So I know that I did everything that I could, but I don't know why what happened. And I don't know that we're really going to get answers, quite frankly. I wish that more people were a bit more upset, you know. Uh, it's not that I don't think that people aren't, but it's the medical community, man. It's just this whole cognitive dissonance, and let's just all move on and kind of act like nothing happened. But the fact that they're still giving remdesivir in the hospital as of now, no, absolutely not from me.
Donna, there's been a bit of in the last year, there's been a bit of a conspiracy theory going on. So a lot of people say that COVID came from China, it came from Wuhan, but apparently there's been some evidence that came out that apparently COVID was actually first detected in July in Italy and in Spain at the time. And there's a lot of people pointing out, especially, knowing how the United States has a lot of biolabs in the world, especially where, the SARS epidemic started near a biolab, especially how the MERS epidemic started near a biolab. And also, Ebola did too, knowing how the United States has a lot of biolabs around the world compared to Russia and China, which is way more. A lot of people said that it came from Fort Detrick, and a lot of people said that the United States, used COVID as a way to destroy the Chinese economy, especially, how they've done it, especially to a lot of countries that got off the United States, banking system, like Iraq, Syria, Libya, all those countries in the past that were a threat, wanted to ditch the dollar and got evaded by the United States. And especially with China, becoming the world's superpower and exposing a lot of the world's elitists and stuff. Do you feel that do you think that COVID did come from the United States, or do you think it did come from China, or do you think it came from Fort Delta, knowing the United States has done, so much propaganda, with chemical warfare, especially in the Spanish flu, and knowing the history? What do you believe in?
I think that and this is all my personal opinion. So I don't know if you've heard of Donald Jeffries. He's this really fantastic author. So he has pointed out a very strong argument that the SARS-CoV, 19 itself, SARS-CoV-2, whatever, they've not been able to isolate that specifically. So what is it? Me personally, I absolutely think that it came from here. whether it's Fort Detrick, whether it was the weird stuff that was going on at the University of Pennsylvania, whether it was the weird stuff going on at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Did we bring it elsewhere during the war games over there in China? I wouldn't be surprised. That would kind of be the perfect setup to start stoking this whole Red Scare narrative. Um, but no, I think absolutely. I think that it was weather enhanced, man made, whatever it may be. I think that it came from here. I think that we did it. I don't think that it was an accident. Um, I don't buy it. Nothing makes sense. And I think it's really weird that, you know, they're supposed to do like the origin report and, you know, no, it didn't come from a lab. Yes, it came from a lab. No, it didn't come from here. Yes, it came from here. They're just constantly throwing the ball back and forth and moving the target and changing the narrative. And I think it's because they don't want to give us the answer, because that answer might be the thing that causes everybody to go out into the streets once they realize that they've been lied to, and the harm and the loss and the pain that it has caused.
So speaking of that, Donna, so tell me about like your research. So you have been reading into something called the false memory syndrome? So tell me about it. What is it? What have you learned about it? And what do you think that people should know about it? And what connection does it have to politics and stuff and conspiracy theories?
The first thing that I will say is false memory syndrome is not real. It is not a syndrome. It was never recognized by the APA, never put into the DSM-5. That is the sort of gold standard of diagnostics in psychology and psychiatry. So I told you briefly about the Franklin scandal. That would tie into this, because this all ties into sort of the satanic panic. But the False Memory Syndrome Foundation is my primary focus as far as my research. So where did it start? It was created in 1992 by Pamela and Peter Freyd. This was because their daughter, Jennifer Freyd, as an adult, had repressed memories about her father abusing her very horrifically for a long time when she was young. And Miss Pamela Freyd could not let the world know what her dear husband did. And so she created a charity called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And what you find, because I have found all of the archives, including the original monthly circular in a printed copy, the first thing that they say in their first circular, and they address it because, in my opinion, I think that they know what they were doing. But they say, how do we know we're not in the business of representing pedophiles? And Pamela offers two reasons. Her first reason is that they have graying hairlines, they look like nice people, and you would want to be friends with them. And the second reason is they're willing to take a polygraph that they know in their heart that they don't have to take. What you see in the subsequent years is a lot of CIA doctors, including Jolly West, Margaret Singer, Martin Orne, and Richard Offshee, and I would argue Miss Elizabeth Loftus. These individuals join the board, and money just starts flowing in. And what we see in the context of quote unquote false memory syndrome. So here's the example that I'll give you, because Elizabeth Loftus is still running around preaching the great truths of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. She was the professional witness for Ghislaine Maxwell, for O.J. Simpson, for Ted Bundy, for Harvey Weinstein, for Oliver North of Iran-Contra, and she was also the professional witness in the McMartin School preschool case. These people have done nothing but caused harm and gaslit victims and children. Uh, the daughter, who was the catalyst for all of this, Jennifer Freyd, she has still not recanted her statement to this day. This idea of the false memory, a false memory syndrome being real, that has been quote unquote debunked by science. I have extensive videos discussing the science, the MRIs, the methodology of trauma, and how trauma can cause our minds to quote unquote split or disassociate, especially in our youth, to protect ourselves. But when we have CIA doctors entering the scene who were involved in Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke and MK Ultra, who are named in NSA testimony from 1994, 90, no, 96, I'm sorry, 1996, where they are specifically named in those projects involving the sexual abuse of children for government ends for mind control, uh, you kind of see what's really going on. And I think that this is, besides the past couple of years, the biggest medical scandal in history. But people still run around acting like this is a thing and we don't need to talk about it.
Mhm. What when like they're trying to prove that false memory syndrome is wrong, like when the doctors are proving it and looking up videos, like how do they prove it's wrong on the brain scans and like the diagnosis is how did they manage to prove it was wrong?
So the term false memory syndrome was not even in the vernacular until the Freuds created that foundation. It wasn't a thing.
Mhm.
They just came out and said, "Oh, our daughter's lying. So she must have this thing called false memory syndrome." And then a bunch of CIA doctors showed up and basically, helped push this narrative out into the public eye. As far as the real diagnostic of what our brains actually do, as far as split personalities or dissociative states, there are extensive MRI studies showing different brain activity when one dissociates or triggers into your alternate or alter personalities. These are things that can be seen on brain scans as far as various brain activity. And there have been court cases where individuals have been allowed to testify as their alternate personalities against their abusers and have won.
Mhm. Wow, that's pretty interesting. They managed to one. What other facts about the false memory syndrome do you think people should be aware of?
I think for me, because, my main focus is victim advocacy and especially children, is for anyone who's, sort of into true crime, things of that nature. When you see the Satanic Panic documentaries, especially on Netflix or Hulu, things like that, um, these are stories that are told from the False Memory Syndrome Foundation perspective, that this was a mental contagion and that there was panic and, a bunch of, conservative people freaking out over nothing. None of that has aged well because none of that is true. These things have been incredibly misrepresented in the media to this day. Um, and there are still active cases of these type of incidents going on right now in regards to satanic ritual abuse and ritual abuse. Um, so that's where my focus is, and that's what I think that people should consider. And I try to source everything and provide links so people can go and look for themselves. It's a very loaded topic, um, but it has truly shaped the way that child abuse cases and situations like Epstein and Ghislaine have been handled, because I mean, one of these people helped Ghislaine get charged for trafficking to nobody. What kind of charge is that? She gaslit all of those victims of Epstein and Ghislaine in court.
I really don't understand why Maxwell has not got the death penalty, and even Epstein should have got the death penalty with all the crimes they've done, And it's just absolutely silliness. And Donna, with the false memory syndrome and satanic abuse, what other cases of this thing really has struck to you the most, and what books would you recommend people to read to learn more about this, like stories from other people that have come out, about this stuff?
I think so besides the Franklin scandal, I think the case that really sticks with me the most is the Presidio Daycare base. So that was a daycare at the Presidio, I believe it was the Air Force base or the Army base. And this was in the time of the Satanic Panic, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, who was the high priest of the Temple of Set, he was the man that was implicated in this. And there are people right now, to this day, who are writing books and making money saying that he's innocent because no charges were filed. Now, if you look, there's court records, newspaper archives, all of it. That is not the case. Yes, he did not get charged as far as the normal court of law, but the Army refused to remove the charges because they said that the evidence was substantial. They took away the charges from his wife, but not from him. And it is important to note in these legal records that the reason why it did not go forward was because the statute of limitations had expired and some of the witnesses refused to cooperate. Mr. Aquino was a very dangerous man. I don't know if it was out of fear or what, but this was a daycare. So these were, 3 and 4-year-olds, and there's newspaper archives. Those kids had so many STDs. It's not even funny. It's completely
Are you
repugnant.
freaking joking me?
No, not at all. You can see, so I try to, kind of track it chronologically, and you can see it's, 1, 2, 3, and then it goes from a handful to boom, there's 50, 100. And keep in mind, this is an armed forces base, so there's a lot of foot traffic. And Aquino was implicated in the Franklin scandal and the trafficking of children as well. So, was this all connected? We don't really know. We can just try to look at everything in hindsight and draw our own conclusions. But the idea that this man is innocent is highly inaccurate. And I do think that it's interesting to note that he was involved in the Phoenix program in Vietnam specifically. So he's very well versed in psychological warfare. And he actually coined the term mind war. That is a book that he wrote based on his experiences in Vietnam doing Psy War under the Phoenix program. But the best book that I could recommend to everybody, there are 2 books about the Franklin scandal. I prefer the book by Nick Bryant. He's very honest with his readers when he finds a source, maybe not credible, or, he's hesitant. And I think that that's a sign of a good author. And the other book that I would recommend is Programmed to Kill by David McGowan. He is no longer with us. He did pass away by a very fast-acting cancer after he released this book. Don't know if it's related, but this is the first book that I've ever read that completely challenges the narrative on all of this, as far as the satanic panic, the false memory syndrome, and what happened with a lot of these cases, specifically the Presidio Daycare case and West Point, because there was also a very sad case at West Point.
So, speaking about the false memory syndrome, As you know, the movie The Sounds of Freedom has come out, and a lot of people says that the sound. Sorry, did I say the name right, or did I get it wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. I'm waiting to see where this question goes.
Um, so I saw a video by you. You posted a very good link about The Sounds of Freedom. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. I saw it a few days ago. And hang on, sorry, give me a second. So The
Sure.
Sounds of Freedom, right? I mean, of course, any movie that talks about, exposing sex trafficking is a good thing. We all know it's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing, for humans to do that. And Mel Gibson is talking about doing a film where he wants to expose, like what's going on in uh, Ukraine with the sex trafficking that goes on there and how that's a super crime and stuff like that. So I'm trying to find that post which you sent about the Sounds of Freedom. How many days ago was that when you posted that?
I think it was 3 or 4 days ago. Are you talking about the little like clip with music?
Yeah, trying to find it. 4 days ago, 3 or 4 days ago. Can't seem to find it.
I actually have, if you look up, if you just type in Ballard, I have quite a few research threads about OUR because they are very problematic, as is the Sound of Freedom.
So yeah, about the Sounds of Freedom. A lot of people say, "Oh, okay, so there's a bit of a scandal going on about it." Of course, we all know, now this is another scandal nobody really talks about, the left or the right. And the scandal is there's a lot of people say, "Oh, it does expose a lot of the elite. The elite are so scared." But then there's the dodginess that goes behind the creator, Tim. And a lot of people say, oh, it's actually, controlled opposition. Some people, not all, but some people say it's controlled opposition. Some people say that no, it's not actually telling the full story. If it did, these guys would be assassinated. Like the guy of Sounds of Freedom is making billions of dollars, but it's not actually going to, the money. And just to confirm, did Operation, thing get taken down, Operation Underground, or is it still up, or did it,
No, they're still up, but Tim Ballard was just forced out right after the release of the movie.
Yeah. So what do you think? Do you think like Sounds of Freedom is legit, or do you think that Tim is controlled opposition and and do you think that conservatives are overhyping this film or falling for a trap? What is your opinion on it? And what is the research that you found about Sounds of Freedom? What would you say? And are you a fan of the
So,
film? Good.
no, I haven't watched it and I refuse to. I think that it's propaganda. So I'll tell you why. Um,
Yeah.
so I did a lot of digging on just Tim Ballard and then Operation Underground Railroad specifically. And so Tim Ballard, from what I've traced, and until people can prove otherwise, it is what it is. I traced the Ballard line, the only other Ballard, which would be the age of his father, and he won't identify his parents, and this individual won't identify all of their children. These are direct bloodlines of Joseph Smith the prophet and the Mormon LDS Church. So that's one aspect to consider. Very powerful people. Their authority is generally not questioned. There has been some very solid investigations over the years by Vice, surprisingly, where they've questioned, why is he focused primarily in notoriously corrupt countries? Is it because he knows that they're willing to play ball? And the reason why they ask that is because he streams some of his quote unquote rescues. He live streams them to international donors. There are so many problems with that as far as victim privacy, victim rights. And they ask, would he, he's not allowed to do this in the United States, and he knows that because he would be arrested. He gets some clout here because he donates computer technology, computers, and the dogs, the sniffing dogs, to different police departments. However, there have been complaints over the years from some police departments where they say, why are you taking credit for an investigation that you had nothing to do with? Please stop doing that. Um, there was a recent investigation that was, kind of open and shut in Utah specifically. which is the hub of the Mormon Church, the LDS Church. I think it's gosh, I don't know I think he's the attorney. I don't know.
General, the Attorney General.
Well, it's Sean Reyes. He's out of Utah. I cannot remember his role, but he is a powerful figure there. And he did a rescue, quote unquote, a few years back with Operation Underground Railroad. And then all of a sudden, he's vouching for them. So was he involved in that investigation being dismissed all of a sudden? I don't really know. The two victims that Ballard over the past few years really says kind of runs their stories into the ground. Those victims have come on record and said that they don't even know him and they don't understand why he's taking credit for it. And then the young boy, I believe his name is Gardy, out of Haiti. That was a really big campaign. Where's Gardy? That kid is still missing. So what happened to him? And the other thing that I think that people should consider is right before Operation Underground Railroad showed up in Haiti, the Clintons were caught literally kidnapping children on camera through their little humanitarian organization. There's also been a lot of problems with Oprah's girls' school that she opened down there. So, no, I don't believe that Operation Underground Railroad or Tim Ballard are operating in good faith. They are not transparent. I have a lot of research in regards to some very questionable finances being moved around.
Like,
Where
what would you say with the questionable finances, for example?
So there's another LDS family that I've been looking into, the Levitts. So they're a bit of a different beast. They are also what I like to call a dynasty or heritage family. So their lineage, they founded the Mormon Utah as a Mormon state. So you got the Ballards as the bloodline of the prophet, and then you've got the Levitts founding Utah as a Mormon state. So the Levitts have been in Ukraine since before the Orange Revolution. They've been over there for a long time, helping to establish democracy, so to speak. They've also been involved in a very sus gifted kids program, which I have a big problem with. And they are also the gentleman, the husband, David Leavitt. I don't know. Department of Homeland Security has been kind of quiet about it, but he was under investigation for human trafficking in regards to specifically some children off of the Indian reservation in Montana. Now, why do I bring this up? Because there was a weird adoption, and essentially he broke federal law and kidnapped this child, but he wheeled and dealed politically to get it done with the tribal chief and tribal child protective services. Why do I bring this up? Because when that happened, specifically, and I just point this out to people and say, just something to consider, that was the only time in OUR's history that they donated to the police department in Montana, in that town, and specifically to the county that David Leavitt was operating out of at that time. No other time did they get any money from them. I think that that's very strange. And I've placed Ballard and Leavitt in Ukraine within less than a week of each other, where they're both, talking about, Ballard's talking about, they're doing Operation Good Friday in Chernihiv, and they're rescuing all of these kids, and they've been there for so long. And David Leavitt's running back there because he has to get quote unquote paperwork. He doesn't mention that he has just been implicated in a satanic ritual abuse case involving other very powerful leaders of the LDS Church. So it's just kind of weird.
So with that, when you look at Sounds of Freedom, what other things that people keep getting wrong? Sorry, what other things about the Sounds of Freedom that people keep getting wrong, that people keep saying that it's against the elite and the elites, and what other things, that you think conservatives and leftists need to understand, about the people behind the Sounds of Freedom, and other facts that you found out about it too, that really, that you don't understand why people were worshipping the film.
That film tugs on your heartstrings, right? That's the goal. And it's they use a lot of religious language, and I think that that's on purpose, because that's hitting, your faith, so to speak, and then also your heart. And of course, most of us, our natural instinct is to want to protect children. So
Absolutely, 100%.
we would think that the quote unquote exposure of these types of crimes would be a good thing. I would argue that people, because I could sit here and talk about it until I'm blue in the face, people need to consider digging into the truth about Ballard.
You can go for it. We can talk to about it for 3 more minutes, 5 minutes if you want. I'm more interested to hear about it.
The controversies that have been addressed with OUR, because there's no proof. There's no proof. There is no proof of any rescues that he has done. None. And I have a big problem with that. But that's just me personally. And this is just my opinion, are they just rubbing it in everyone's face? Because why was he just forced out of OUR like a week ago, and this movie just came out? But apparently there was a lot of complaints and an investigation going on within the company, and he was forced out. He did not walk away. That was his words. What the details are of that, I don't know. But if you look up, because I do think that people, it's something that they really have to be willing to engage with the information themselves, because this movie has really put a psychological chokehold on people, and it's it's unfortunate. I feel like it's propaganda. I really do. I don't think that it's helping anybody. I think personally that it is feeding into a narrative that things are being handled and that nobody needs to worry. And I would argue that that is completely incorrect, because it was April 23rd, I believe. That was when Tara Rhodes, the HHS whistleblower, came onto TV and spoke about how we are the middleman of a global child trafficking network. And there hasn't really been much talk about anything since.
So basically, it sounds to me like he's discrediting all of, basically, they're pretending they're the ones who are fighting, the child trafficking industry, rather than, not giving credit to any of the other people who are actually fighting it. Is that what it seems like?
I personally think that he's involved in some very shady stuff. I don't think he's helping anybody. I think he's dealing with corrupt. Police departments, corrupt countries, corrupt governments, because they're corrupt. And until it can be proven otherwise, not by speculation, and not by him just saying so, I don't know. I don't trust him. I think that he is not a good person, and that's just my personal opinion. Like I said, where's the proof? People make jokes about the Clintons disappearing everybody, right? They haven't been punished. And again, right before Tim Ballard shows up, they're down there literally getting caught on camera, kidnapping kids in Haiti. We haven't seen any fruit of his work. We've just seen, these really intense emotional videos. And, The Sound of Freedom was filmed like 4 or 5 years ago. So like I said, I have strong feelings about it, but hopefully people will consider maybe just looking into it a little bit further, because when it comes to kids specifically, if we're not willing to evaluate these types of things with a critical eye and not let our emotions get in the way, we're never going to survive as a society, quite frankly.
Yeah. I think we need to be doing more to fight sex trafficking. I think it's disgusting. It should be a felony. It should be the death penalty. Anybody who does it, like
Absolutely.
in China and Russia, they have very strict rules, especially in
Absolutely.
Iran and Iraq. If you do that type of stuff, you'll get the death penalty, and they don't allow it. Apparently, like in some countries, I heard sometimes they actually actually cut a man's arm off if they touch a young girl. And it's so ridiculous how we allow stuff like abortion, how we allow that, how we allow abortion to happen, which is killing a young baby. But why don't we have the death penalty for pedophiles? It's just like absolutely unacceptable. Diana, Diana, one more thing about the Sounds of Freedom thing. What investigations has Operation? Have you already talked about that? Have you talked about that? Or
Yeah, no, we talked about that, and like I said,
oh, that's it, yes.
Vice, if people wanna look it up, Vice is gonna be the go-to. The articles are a couple years old. They're so long, but they really did a good job. They even, were ballsy enough to reach out to the CIA and ask if Tim Ballard actually worked for them, and they responded, and they said, "We will tell you yes or no if he signs a waiver," and he refused. So, that's that.
Wow, that is wow, you wouldn't expect of Vice. What is one article that Vice wrote about it that was very good about it?
I will see what I can find because I haven't done anything on OUR in a while. I have it all, in my Twitter, but I don't have any of it saved on my computer right now because, like I said, they're old. But I'll find them and I'll send them to you. That way, if people decide that they want to look at it, because there's a few of them and they're all very extensive.
We can keep going for another half an hour if you wanted to. Is that okay with you for 20 minutes? Or
So I've got to go check on my pup here in a couple
oh,
minutes. I'm
no worries, that's
sorry.
all good. I was thinking what we could talk about is so you say you're from the state of Florida. We were talking before, the beginning of the show, about Ron DeSantis. What is your opinion? Okay, so how do you see the future of the United States going? Like, do you think, that, like, what is your honest opinion? Sorry, do you think, that someone's going to come and save the United States? Do you think Donald Trump's going to come and save it? Ron DeSantis? Do you think that, Trump is going to be the guy, especially though knowing the fact he put millions of sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba. He wanted to go to war with Iran. He also bombed Yemen and Libya and Somalia. And also, he actually wanted to give the death penalty to Julian Assange before he ran for president. You probably know about that. Do you think like Donald Trump will be the one who saves the United States, even though he has his own agenda? Or do you think that in 2025, the United States empire is done, the dollar's going to collapse, and do you think we're going to probably see a multipolar world, like a more peaceful world? How do you see it going?
I think that no one is coming to save us. And I think that the it's almost like the Weimar, like right before the fall of Weimar basically, and then like the fall of Rome, and we're just kind of in the middle, and it's almost like this perfect synchronicity as far as this massive inflation, legalization of infanticide, just completely insane sexual degeneracy. So I think that we're seeing a kind of convergence of history repeating itself in different ways from all angles. As far as the specific timeline, whether it's in a year and a half or whether it's specifically Agenda 2030, which is what they keep touting, um, hopefully people kind of wise up to things. Uh, I don't I don't think that politics are real. I think that we are provided with choices, and those choices have masters that they have to answer to at the end of the day. They run around on the campaign circuit and, get everybody excited and tell people what they want to hear. And I think that Trump is a perfect example of that because he said that he was, gonna drain the swamp, gonna purge the deep state. And what does he do? He turns around and he pardons Scooter Libby, and gets back the old project for a new American Century neocon crew to run Operation Warp Speed. And, people want to say that, he had no choice or he didn't know. And I just would highly disagree. Let's learn from what he taught us and not expect anything different. But I think that goes for both sides. I think that it's a puppet show. I think that Ron DeSantis is also a puppet for multiple reasons. And
especially signing a bill in Israel that is anti-free speech. And you said something to me before the show about how you were wanting to give out a flyer and to test you. What was it again?
Yeah, so they passed a law. It's illegal here to litter with anything that has any sort of anti-Israel anything. Mm-hmm. Now, don't get me wrong. Anti-Semitism is completely unacceptable. However, I can judge the government apparatus without judging the individual.
Especially Israel's crimes against Palestine, which they're doing right now, the Israeli government, it's just horrific.
Yeah, thank you. Exactly. And just like the world is fully entitled to hate our government because of the things that we do, and they don't necessarily hate all of us individually. People need to understand that two things can be true at the same time. So I'm going to test out this theory because, I think it's pretty well known and accepted that Epstein and Ghislaine were agents of the Mossad. So I'm going to go when Ron rallies, and I'm going to go hold up some signs with some catchy sayings and set one on the ground. And I guess we'll see if I end up in handcuffs or not. Because, those two have gotten pretty sweet deals while they were here in Florida, quite frankly. So I have big issues with that too. So we're going to test out the theory, and I'll let you guys know how it goes. Hopefully it doesn't end up with me in a mugshot.
I think you should have every right to protest, and I think him passing a bill. I mean, he really, if anything, I really have a feeling, that if Ron DeSantis runs for president, if he does win the GOP, even though I don't think he will, maybe he could, because knowing the U.S. elections are completely rigged, which they have been since 1860, well, forever. And knowing the election system is bloody screwed, I think he's going to pick Mike Pence. I think him and Mike Pence is George Bush and Dick Cheney 2.0.
I think you're absolutely right. That is a neocon wet dream right there. Yeah, absolutely. I think that he is a total neocon, and I think that if he gets elected, we are absolutely going to see a repeat of the Bush administration. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, but if the United States is still going to be around, because I don't know, I think it's going to, we'll see economically, it's going to. Diana, so before we finish up, is there anything else you would like? Donna, sorry, is there anything before you finish up? Is there anything else you would like to say, and where can people find you?
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad that we finally got to do this. People can find me. So on Instagram and YouTube, my username is Rotting Jules, all one word. And then on Twitter, my username is Dana Duda. So if you want to come learn about sort of the dark history, especially the military pharma industrial complex, I'm your girl to get you through it.
Thank you for coming on, Donna. It was a pleasure having you, and you're a very cool guest. And I just want to say to everybody, please go and check Donna's work out. She's fantastic at exposing a lot of the crimes of the elite. She does very good content, very knowledgeable, very cool, person. And yeah, give her a like and subscribe. Give her all the support she needs. And I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining the Welsh Republic Podcast, episode 121 today. Take care, everybody. Please remember to like and subscribe this video. Share it to all your friends and family. Take care, everybody. Have a nice day. Goodbye, and God bless you all.